Hello, today is Tuesday, February 28th, 2023. I'm Andrew Brown, and this is Staying Connected. Any large-scale migration of network services is a complex undertaking involving the transition of mission-critical services and infrastructure. It's particularly complex for large enterprises with national and international footprints that can involve hundreds, sometimes thousands of locations that need to be transitioned to the new service. Seamlessly, of course, without interruption or degradation or really any kind of effect noticed by the end user population. Not only is the scale of these types of projects typically huge, but the governance and corporate decision-making driving the process is likely to be pretty complicated. And meeting user needs and specific regional requirements can be equally demanding. You're expected to get it completely right, but there's a whole lot that can go wrong. Today's Staying Connected guest and subject matter expert on how to get your cloud migration right should be a familiar voice to our podcast listeners. In a bit of role reversal, I'm hosting today, but don't worry, I am not piloting this plane alone. I am joined by Joe Schmidt, a longtime director at TechCaliber Consulting, who many of our regular listeners will recognize as the voice of Staying Connected, the podcast he created. But in addition to his regular podcasting responsibilities, Joe actually has a full-time day job advising our firm's clients on their most important information and communications technology sourcing initiatives. He's a top-notch consultant first and foremost, and today he's here to talk about some of the top mistakes enterprises should avoid when doing a migration of ICT services to the cloud. Joe, welcome to the podcast, or should I say welcome to your podcast?
Hey, thank you, Andrew. It's nice to be here as a guest for the very first time after more than 6 years of hosting.
Well, you do know that the guests have to do all the work on this show. They answer all the questions and they basically carry the entire conversation.
Yeah, I get that, and I am totally ready.
Okay, so seriously, let's talk about cloud migrations, which you've had a lot of experience shepherding the last few years. You've seen a whole lot of varying processes and outcomes.
Yeah, I sure have.
So let's start with the most basic question. What makes the difference between successful migrations and ones that don't go so well?
Well, as you'd expect, it's not just one thing. I have a whole list of items that you need to get right. Let me start by stating the obvious. New deployments don't work out well if you pick the wrong solution. The technology might not be right for your needs. Technology might be right, but the vendor delivering the solution might be wrong. Or the company itself may not have what's needed for the solution to work due to important considerations like outdated wiring, equipment, and software, and poorly defined processes.
Yeah, I get that. And that's really why companies are smart to invest the time upfront to document their requirements and do their due diligence about solutions and providers. Basically make sure all the internal stakeholders are involved so they can raise red flags early and address those issues before engaging with the vendor.
Yep, that's right.
So in your opinion, what does a good process for doing that look like? And in what kind of time frame should a company realistically expect to complete that?
So the process doesn't have to be particularly complicated, but it should be methodical. You need an approach that gives you a deliverable that is clear and fact-based. Saying that you want a transformative solution is nice, but your output needs to quantify what that means. Timeframes, well, they vary depending on the internal politics and processes of a company and the complexity of the migration. But realistically, I'd say you're going to want to spend a minimum of 6 to 12 months, maybe more.
Well, and that's just for the internal planning and goal setting, right? I mean, what comes after that?
Well, the real fun starts when you throw the vendor into the mix. Now, assuming that the right solution is selected, companies still run into all kinds of problems. Too often, the overall migration planning is siloed and therefore it's flawed. The vendor has a project plan, the client has a project plan, but they aren't integrated. So these key tasks and dependencies obviously get missed. My point is that if planning isn't done collaboratively, the project's really going to struggle. Now, another thing that is often overlooked, Andrew, is the impact on legacy technology and services. Fact is that even when an enterprise deploys a cloud-based UC solution, for example, some manufacturing plants and offices will still need legacy POTS lines for emergency phones or elevators or alarm systems. You can't just get rid of everything, as appealing as that might be from a financial or network engineering perspective. Assuming all legacy technology can be replaced, well, that's a bad assumption to make.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Do you see any difference between, say, a US only solution deployment and one that's more global?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, everyone would love a cookie cutter approach to deploying these cloud-based solutions, but you always have to address regional requirements. I mean, you're the E911 expert, so you know that the US has more stringent emergency calling requirements than
Yeah.
most countries for new UC solutions, at least for now. Similarly, the way solutions are architected for most of the world, well, those configurations, they aren't usually permitted in countries like China and India. So it requires some exception handling. And the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah, and with that kind of variability, the documentation for these solutions has to be pretty comprehensive to cover all those bases. I mean, you and I have worked on deals where the statements of work alone can run over 100 pages.
And you really can't overlook that part because a good contract or SOW, it defines who is responsible for doing what. And when the fingers start getting pointed, you need a source to resolve that conflict. But the pre migration planning and negotiation only can get you so far. Another problem companies and vendors run into is that everything looks great on paper, but something always goes wrong that slows the implementation. So the implementation team gets overcommitted and can't possibly get everything done in the time and fashion contemplated in the contract. Companies really have to build in flexibility, either in the contract or in the internal timelines and general approach to the implementation. Stuff just happens. Now, you and I, we get engaged by clients because it's helpful to have an outside advisor, someone that is not quite as invested in the internal goings on at a company, so that we can provide a realistic time frame that builds on these types of, shall I call them, predictable, unexpected delays.
Yeah, that's definitely true. So, this is all very interesting and useful. And it's probably a good time for me to point out that you're actually going to be doing a deep dive on this subject at the upcoming Enterprise Connect conference in Orlando on March 27th, correct?
Yes, I am. Enterprise Connect. It is a huge annual get together of ICT professionals, and I will be moderating a panel for the session Top 7 Mistakes to Avoid in a Global Cloud Migration. Now, there are a lot more than 7 mistakes, Andrew, but the EC folks only gave us an hour. Now, on that stage, I'll be joined by subject matter experts from AT&T and Verizon, as well as Tata. And I do plan to have a good conversation with them about the ups and downs of these migrations and what enterprise customers can do to make them go well.
And well, I assume you'll hold them accountable for what vendors can do to make the migrations go as well.
Of course. I mean, that really is what I do for my day job.
Okay, Joe. Sounds great. Thank you so much for switching chairs with me today and sharing your expertise. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, you bet. It was great for me too.
We are out of time, so I got to do your close now.
Okay, go for it, but don't mess it up.
Okay, thanks. I'll do my best. Everybody, thanks for joining us today. If you are interested in attending Joe's session at Enterprise Connect in Orlando, check out the TC2 or LB3 websites for more information under our podcast section. Or if you want any more information about cloud migrations, drop Joe, me, or any of our TC2 or LB3 colleagues with whom you might work an email or give them a call. And of course, you can stay up to date on all of the ICT issues we cover by subscribing to these podcasts, by checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.